Alright, what's up, guys? I haven't made videos in a while because, fuck it. But lately, I've been working to become, like, Dungeon Master for our little friend group online. And since it's my first time playing Dungeons and Dragons, of course I've done about 3 sessions so far. And, I learn a little bit more each session about what to do, what not to do. I've also learned that if you make any small detail in your dungeon stick out, your players will spend like an hour there fucking with it, even though you originally planned for it to do nothing. So, just a little tipperoo for you there. But what I want to talk about right now is, so far my process that I've learned for building a campaign. Since I am a new DM, I feel like maybe this perspective can help other new DMs, because maybe they're going through something similar to me, where they have the idea in mind for quests, and they have their party, and they have their characters made, their friends that they're playing with have their characters made, and their sort of goals outlined. And so in your mind you have all these ideas swimming around, but you don't know where to start. And so what I did was I started with making a world. So this is the world that I made. I started by just drawing the shape of, I just drew a blob, basically. Kind of made some interesting sort of terrain, interesting sort of, like, changes in the shape, be pretty amorphous. And I added some islands afterwards, these little things. And then what I did was I went through, colored everything this green color, and I started thinking to myself, okay, so where do I want them to start? And what kind of terrain is there? And that's how I came across this area. Whenever I did the one shot that turned it into a 3-shot, we were in a dungeon I made that was by an old fortress that had been there for who knows how long. Locals assumed for hundreds of years, but later on I revealed it was more like a couple thousand years. That's not really particularly relevant to what's going on here. But I decided that the fort would be near a mountain, because that's a good spot for a fort to be. And they were in a small coastal town originally, but whenever I was making this map, I thought, well, it would be a little bit more realistic to put them along one of the trading routes through the kingdom. And so as you give your place more form, you kind of develop more ideas. So what I did was, I colored everything green, and I thought about my starting point. But what I actually ended up doing before even writing down, like, oh, this is my starting point, I just put in terrain that would match up to various story points that I wanted to bring up. Like, I knew I wanted a desert. I knew I wanted some sort of portal gateway to the Feywilds. I knew I wanted something with the Kuo-Toa for a side quest with one of my players that they wanted to do. And then I also wanted an aspect of, not everyone in this kingdom necessarily gets along, and so I decided, it would make sense if people isolated from the rest of the continent up in the north, they have a more tough outlook, a more a harder way of living for sure, and they value strength a lot higher than anything else, and they just kind of allow themselves to be in the kingdom just sort of out of an obligation, or just like a basic, like, well, there's it's a unified kingdom, so they're clearly strong enough to rule, blah blah blah, that you don't need to, like, go into it that deep just to start with. It's just as you're drawing these locations, just sometimes, like, what I did was I started with the desert. After I did everything green, I did the desert, and after that, I was like, okay, so what would make this desert geologically make sense? Because this island is probably in a fairly temperate zone. But then I was like, well, maybe it's not. And so I'm like, well, what if there was a mountain range around it that blocked off like water and like made storm fronts move around it so that this area turned into a desert over a long period of time because it wasn't getting water or rainfall. And so that's how it came to be a desert. And then I drew some more mountains in while I was at it. I was like, I'll scatter some mountains around the region. So I did all of the mountains here, all the light brown mountains I did at one time. I was like, it'd be fun to put some on the little islands, a couple of the little islands. And then I made this big, I was like, I want an isolated part of the map where a different sort of mentality of people live. And so I made this mountain range up here to sort of separate them from the rest of the map. And I thought, well, what if this mountain range is what shields the rest of the kingdom from most of the cold fronts that come in and would normally make this region somewhat more on the cold side. And so I thought, well, maybe that means this area would be pretty snowy all the time, or maybe have just like a longer winter season and then a pretty short spring or summer. And then, since it absorbed most of the cold fronts that came through, you get a more temperate, kind of deciduous environment here. And after that, what I did was I did the water. I drew the rivers through here, and I wanted I wanted two lakes, and then this second lake here kind of just turned into the Feywild Spire because at that point, after a while, I was like drawing. Whenever I was doing the cities, I was like, oh, it would be fun to have a city that had some sort of connection to the Feywilds, because that relates to one of my plot lines I'm doing. So I just popped that in there, and I kind of like how it turned out. It's very central to the kingdom, a very prominent feature. And so I put the capital, one of the six, or was it six? Yeah, six. I made 6 major cities of my country, Apelicius. So that brings me to the cities. So what I did was I looked at the map. I thought, where would there be a good spot for a city? I thought, well, obviously next to the portal to the Feywilds, that would be something that you have a lot of resources here. You got woods, you got the rivers, so you can get a lot of trade going all around the nation. And you have the Feywilds you can access through here. Maybe you can get some trade going on with the Sealy, something like that. And so I made this the overall capital, the seat of the country, if you will, here. And I named it Helmspire. I'll get to names in a little bit. And then I was like, all right, well, maybe you got some dwarves living here. They would be up in the mountains up north. This is a really large mountain range. The dwarves' native area would be in this northern region. And so I also made a sort of I went with a sort of Nordic mixed with dwarvish kind of area theme. Just some tough people living up in the cold. And then I decided, you know what, it would be fun for one of these islands here to have a big city here. Maybe because they have this mountain, they have some rich ores, they have this forest, so they have plenty of lumber, and their city was allowed to get pretty big. And so that bumps them up in population. And they have these 2 supporting cities, got plenty of fish, and you know, it's a pretty short couple of hops across to get to the mainland, so it's pretty reasonable, and they could sail down to get goods if they want. So I decided, you know, that's another good spot for a city. Then I thought, up here, reservoir, good spot for a city. You're next to some woods. Over here, you know, you're on the coast. You have a pretty good lookout. If you had invading forces come, you know, maybe they'd try to invade from here. Another good spot for a city. And same with down here. It's hard to pass through the parched expanse. Would be really difficult to do. There's not really many resources you could survive on. But, you know, there's enough up here. You can have a city, and you can still go through here and have trade with this. And so I feel like they would be another somewhat isolated city in the kingdom, maybe connected to the elvish cities throughout, like, here and here. This is the more elvish region, and this I made a sort of LV kind of name, but in practice, in the plot line, it is controlled by a human, but due to plot reasons. For the most part, you know, I also, at this point, started thinking of smaller cities, and I was like, well, they'd be in a reasonably radiation, the towns would radiate outwards from the cities at a reasonable place. They would be near enough to get supplies in their areas, but close enough to have an established trade route along them. And so that's what the sort of thought process I had while putting out the cities. And I think the only one that really is kind of questionable is this one. But I figured if it was just like a trading outpost where you cross along between two sides of the continent here, it would be reasonable to have a city or a town there. And I thought even with the amount of traffic it might be getting, that it could actually be one of the higher population towns. And so, you know, that's how I mapped out my cities. And then while I was mapping out the cities, I was thinking about where like races live natively. And I was like, all right, so I'm going to get some names made. And so some of the names, like all the major cities and a few of the smaller cities surrounding them, I made the names for myself. And then the rest of them, I went through and I looked up like elvish like town names, dwarvish town names, stuff like that. I stole these two towns just straight out of Norway. Actually, I'm not sure if Aalborg is in Norway. I know Stavanger is. I don't know if I pronounced either of those correctly, actually. So if you're from one of those places, sorry, I apologize. But yeah, so I was trying to be fairly true. So I wanted the big city names to be really original to my thought process. Just of like whatever I could think of that I thought was a good name for it. That sounded pretty like elvish and stuff. And then I thought I will use the generator to make up for the other ones and definitely have more elvish sounding names. And like dwarvish names. The dwarvish ones I had the most problem with because I'm not really familiar with like dwarvish names and like media and stuff. I am more familiar with like, it's easier to come up with like elf sounding names for me because I think like ethereal, kind of light sounding, but still, you know, somewhat of like a Germanic kind of flavor to it. Maybe not necessarily Germanic, but you know, like a European, which I know encompasses a lot of different language families. So I apologize if I offended someone by saying that. And so that's the order I did. I did the elf stuff first, and then I did the Dwarvish / Nordic / Scandinavian, whatever you want to call it. Because I know some people get mad at being called one or the other. Names next, and then I did the fantasy. I looked up like fantasy names and like English town names. Like European English, not American English. And so I kind of, for all the names, I didn't just take anything that the generator gave me and like copy paste. A lot of the times I'd like parts of names, and so I'd kind of like amalgamate them into something that sounded a little bit more natural, because you know it's a generator, it doesn't necessarily have a natural feel to it. And so, and I was also skipping over a lot of names that I thought were cool, but I was like, it doesn't really fit this area. Like Clearview here, I'm like, you know, you have a pretty clear view of the ocean here. So, and you have like grasslands around you. The only thing really blocking off your vision in the immediate vicinity, well, I mean, no one can see this far. This is like, I mean, like 50 miles here to here. So, I mean, it's not like they're seeing that mountain. Maybe if it's big enough, it would kind of be a dot in the horizon. Obviously, it's not 100% to scale with the like mountain height here. It's more so just easy dramatization, so you can kind of tell the general layout, shape on the map. And so that's how I did the names. Sorry to ramble. After that, oh no, before that, sorry, I did the darker green for the forests. I don't know if I mentioned that. I probably did. If I didn't, sorry. But that's why I just kind of took a brush and painted over. And then later, as I was filling in towns and stuff, I was like erasing parts and trying to make it look a little bit more natural, kind of with the layout, without making it like overlap other stuff too much, because I wanted to still kind of be easy to read. And then I went and ruined that whenever I made the trade routes. So as I was doing all this, since I was thinking about, like, when I made the towns, I was thinking about how they would radiate outwards from the cities. I was like, well, what would make sense for them to radiate outwards with? And, like, they have to be connected somehow, because a town this size, like out here, obviously can't sustain itself with nothing for, like, 100 miles in either direction. So I was like, well, they'd have supply lines from the major cities. They'd be obviously trading with each other. Not everyone has everything. And so in order to make the kingdom function, you'd have to have trade, clearly. I mean, people out here don't have lumber, like up here. Lumber is a commodity here and here. So you definitely need a trade network going on. And of course, you have the mining communities up here, and like maybe a few in here that would be bringing in ores to the cities. And then I thought, well, you know, this island kind of has it all over here, so it would have like some minor trade lines just between itself. And then up north, I was like, people up here would be pretty concerned with being fairly independent, so to them, a trade line might seem weak. They might just get everything they need by foraging or doing it themselves. And they might make the trek themselves to get here, mine their stuff, and head back. Who knows? Or they just have some trade with the dwarves if they need like ores, but they mostly keep to themselves. I don't know. I was just kind of thinking along those lines at the time. It may not necessarily make sense in hindsight, but you know, that's what retroactively changing it is for. So, and I noticed as I was doing this, as you know, sorry, let me try that again. As you've probably noticed as a viewer, like, I've just gone off on this. Like, you can tell, like, the moment I started talking about, like, trade lines and, like, native, like, areas for different races, you can tell it's like you're putting more thought into it as you build it. And so I feel like this is a really great, like, hands-on approach to making a world. And I still place it, I guess, in the canon of, like, the D&D, like, universe. So it's not, like, a super unique setting like some people like to do. But, you know, I like classic fantasy stuff, so it's enough for me. Maybe you'd want to change it if it was you. But for my purposes, this is suitable. And I found for sure that as you going along step by step, thinking about it more and more, really unlocks a lot more ideas and like reasoning for things being the way you draw it. Especially like approaching it from a like logical aspect, from like weather or like trade routes, like radiation between cities or towns. And of course on this map, you know, like this distance here is like 100 miles. So I mean, that would imply that there's like 100 miles between these two cities on this trade route. But I figured things smaller than towns, like villages and hamlets, don't really need to be on the map. They're not important enough. And all you need the towns for is to know the basic trade network and kind of give a feeling of population to the map. But you can expect there to be like plenty of villages and hamlets scattered around in here, kind of mooching off the trade line and like making do with what they can. That's why they're smaller. They're not the size of a town because they have less resources. So that's just kind of my perspective as I was making this, and I found it really helpful. Like I said, I really felt like this kind of came to life as I was making it, like putting in all the work to like name even like the mountains and like the tundra here, this desert. It really makes the world feel like a tangible place instead of just trying to keep a bunch of ideas straight in your head or like have like a little notes page. And so after I made this, I sat here and I looked at it and I was like, all right, starting point, you know, here. I was like, what are the goals? Like, what are the steps, step by step, where is our main quest going to take us? And I was like, well, for my main quest, the first thing they need to do is go consult the king of the local Sealies in the Feywilds. So they're going to have to travel along the trade route where it's safe or safer. You know, I also made some lore while I was at it. You know, like I made this like lore that like since the space between the realms here, the Feywilds and the material plane are really close together in this country. It's not too uncommon for Feywilds monsters to slip through, and it makes it pretty dangerous if you're traveling. So I thought, well, the lore is these trading routes were set up and they traveled by caravan to keep people safe. And people in the towns don't really travel unless they're stupid, for one, or they can pay an adventurer or a caravan to let them in for security. So that's just some additional lore I kind of thought up. Anyhow, step by step on the quest from here to here, and I was like, well, then after the Feywilds, like, where are you going next? You know, I give them a couple options, maybe like go up to here or here, just depending on what they learn, what they want to do. And I'm like, hold on, before I even follow the main quest, we also have to consider side quests, because one of my players wants their hometown to be a little village around in here. They're a dwarf, makes sense, geologically, not geologically, that's the wrong word, topologically, it makes sense for them to be from, you know, north area, by the canon of this map, anyways. And so, what I did was, I was like, okay, so your little side quest thing where you want to go visit your ruined village and, like, find your mother's necklace and recover that, like, that's one of their little things they want to do. And I was like, okay, so we're going to take a little trip up here. So I thought, well, if the party's starting here, that's a reasonable distance away. That's not too bad. Maybe on the party's way back to Longbarrow is when they meet this player character at an herbalist hut whenever they're getting some herbs to heal someone's husband for a quest or something. Or, you know, if they don't want to cooperate with that, I'll think of some other way to introduce them. Because the player character wants to be like an herbalist and like brew potions and stuff and start a tavern. And so I was like, okay, maybe when they meet up here, they mentioned that they want to go to their hometown and they can make the trek up there. I'll add in like a few little spicy encounters or some little fun things along the road there to do. They'd be mostly following the trade route until they got to about here, and then they'd take the off the beaten path to go to the village. At which point the side quest there will unfold. And then, of course, I have the other party member in my party who, their whole shtick is that they're a warlock who doesn't like their patron. They took their patron only because they had to at the time, and they want to totally defamate all religions, including their patrons, and replace it with a fake religion of their own design so they can, like, get money out of it, basically. And what they want to do is, sorry, I don't know why I keep just highlighting this single town that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. They want to meet the Kuo-toa, the God Makers, and try to, like, dominate or persuade or, you know, in other words, take control of them and influence them to create his party god. He wants to worship just party, and his god is named Big Chillin'. And so I'm like, well, if he succeeds, like, this is where he needs to go. And if he succeeds, then, you know, maybe throw him some fun little flavors for his warlock class. Maybe homebrew a couple of little bonus spells for him. And at that point, he'll also be in contention with his patron. And so I thought that could be a fun little conflict down the line. I haven't really completely thought that one out yet, but, you know, this is the general area that's happening in. So from here to here, for characters, they go from here to here to here to here. You know, you're exploring like a decent part of the map here. You start to get a sense of the world. And then after that, you know, they'd come back, maybe say, like, well, we don't have anything else to do right now, so we'll go along to where we're supposed to be going. Of course, along the way, I'll give them plenty of opportunities for more stuff to happen. I have a fun encounter planned. Oh, fuck. Well, my friends don't really watch my videos that often, so I can probably say it, but on the off chance that one of y'all in the D&D group are watching, turn off your ears and, like, la 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 la, you know. So what I want to do is I want to do, like, a fun, like, mimic that has, like, a giant, really old mimic, really intelligent, and it has situated itself along a really popular part of the trade route and disguised itself as a full-on tavern, including the barkeeper. Like, the barkeeper would be mute, he can't speak because he's just a shape by the mimic. The mimic can speak, but its voice is, like, you know, not a normal human voice, so it just thinks staying silent is the best option. And the heroes would stay the night at the tavern, and then in the morning they'd find that they had a really shit night of sleep. They could, like, really restless, couldn't sleep at all hardly. And, like, later on, the next encounter they get in, I'll reveal to them that they are missing half of their hit points because the tavern took some of their blood while they were sleeping, and that's how it sustains itself, on the blood of travelers. It's a smart mimic because it knows that it can't get away with just eating people or else someone's going to investigate it and kill it. So instead it settles for just drinking the blood of the guests and setting up in a really population-heavy area with lots of traffic going through on the trade route. And, you know, if anyone else tries to build a tavern in the area, they just might disappear. Who knows? I wrote some more lore for it and a lot of other stuff and, like, you know, ways to give the players clues beforehand that it's not what it seems. But I'm not going to spoil them here because, you know, that's no fun. What if someone else wants this idea and wants to flesh it out in their own way? Don't want to, like, make you feel shoehorned into the way I think of it, so. Anyhow, so that's, you know, some stuff I want to happen along the way, different side quests and stuff available to them, things that'll, like, take him just, like, a little ways nearby, investigate some, like, you know, hidden treasure, or go fetch some medicine for my dying husband, please, or, stuff like that. I want to make sure that every part of the journey has enjoyment to be had. So I'm trying to think of some unique things to happen in between the travel times to all these different places they're going to. Eventually, I think, for the most part, I'm using, like, every part of the map except for, like, this region. Doesn't really get much use. They just kind of pass through. So I'm trying to think of something unique to like add in like here or here. I mean, I have some stuff like here, here. You know, they have the option to either try to make the perilous journey to cross through here, or I've been planning a murder mystery that I want to kind of sprinkle in. Maybe give them the option that, hey, maybe the dwarves, two of the dwarf communities, have collaborated and built a tunnel that goes through the mountains. And so, if you're traveling, you can talk to the dwarves, and if they trust you, they'll let you through the tunnel, and you can get up to the north more easily than trying to pass through this like treacherous area here, where you have to go quite a ways through nothing till you reach the next destination. And so I thought, you know, it'd be fun to maybe call the party's trust into question. Because, I mean, I don't know how good or bad they're going to be in this playthrough. Or, like, you know, just in terms of how chaotic they're going to be and how many ripples they'll have across the kingdom. So I think, you know, what would be a more fun way to slow them down here than to frame them for murder and then have them solve a murder mystery to prove their innocence. So I wrote a bit of a murder mystery for them to solve to cross through here. Or if they want to try to make it through here with just pure combat and survival, you know, that's an option too. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if one of them said, let's climb the mountains. Of course, I will do everything within my power to dissuade them of that because, you know, it'll be more fun to have them do the murder mystery or try to survive going through here. The mountains, I feel like, it would be similar to going through here, but maybe have some more environmental hazards. Maybe a dragon lair or something. Cliche, I know, but, you know, something that gives it some kick, even if they don't really go through the way I want them to. Because, you know, as a DM, nothing ever is going to go the way you want it to. So, gotta find ways to compensate, so... But yeah, so that's just kind of the idea, the way that I found building a campaign to be useful. I started off with a lot of ideas in my head, which, you know, that part of the campaign building process can be, like, difficult. I think if you start with one really solid overarching quest, which I just happened to think of by chance, so I'm sorry I can't really give any good advice there. I had the idea to, like, have an arch-lich, like a good lich, that wants to die, and so, but it can't because the journal its soul is bonded to has been stolen, like, 1,000 years ago, or some odd years ago, by, like, some silver-tongued devil who charmed a whole kingdom and brought about its fall. And so that, you know, places some interesting history points there to go and uncover as you unlock this tale. It also gives you kind of a fun, interesting quest. You know, it's not every day you get to help out a lich. I mean, arch-lich, but, you know. So I think I just kind of got lucky whenever I thought of that idea, just randomly off the cuff. You can always try to just look at monsters and stuff for inspiration, I guess. I don't know. For me, I just kind of randomly come up with inspiration whenever I kind of just think of what kind of a quest I want to make. Like, so say I want to make like a puzzle dungeon. I'm like, well, what kind of quest would fit that? Maybe some sort of hidden magical item made by a wizard who wanted to protect it. Maybe it has a puzzle dungeon made around it that the players have to solve to get the magic item. Or, like, I want to make a murder mystery. Where do I want to put that? And I was like, well, you know, this would be a good spot to put it in the story. Be a fun way to kind of slow them down whenever they're trying to do something important. Kind of add some tension to the stakes. Of course, who knows if I'm going to even get through all these ideas of like little miniature encounters and stuff I have planned. It's just going to be fun to make them all. But if you kind of have an idea in mind of like a goal or like a device you want to use, like a type of dungeon, like do you want them to find treasure? Do you want them to find a magic item? Like, and what would that dungeon look like? Like, where would it be? Like, who would tell you about it? Or would you just randomly find like a clue that led you to it? Or would you just randomly stumble over it? Other things like killing monsters for locals, like if there's a tough monster in the area, they need to get rid of it. You can kind of plan those out to be more like The Witcher 3. You know, you identify the monster, and then you go and kill it. You know, optionally, you can figure out its weaknesses and how to lure it out to kill it a little more easily. Let's see, what else? Ingredients quests, like if there's someone dying who needs an herb, or, you know, maybe an herbalist sends you out and says, I'm looking for a rare flower, but unfortunately I'm just too old and the area it's in is just too dangerous for me nowadays, but I really want to make myself a mean old potion. So you go and get the ingredient for them, like where would it be, like what kind of monsters would be in that type of terrain, that area. How hard do you want those monsters to be? What kind of reward, aside from the normal quest reward, would you want them to maybe find there? Some extra goodies, depending on how hard you make it. That's how I come up with like basic quests. And then in order to make it feel more fleshed out, I come up with some unique ideas like the tavern mimic. I have like some specific monster encounters I want to run in a way that's kind of creepy, kind of like ambush them, some sort of surprise, make some tension. And then I also have my characters to consider, my players, you know, the reasons they're playing the game, their characters, like what are their motivations, what are their goals. Do they have enemies? Do they have friends that I can include in the story? So I talk to my players and I'm like, hey, like, what are your characters' motivations? Like, do they have any goals? And so a lot of them didn't really, they're new players. That like this is also their first time playing. And so I was helping them out with like I was just sitting there asking them questions like, all right, so if this happens to them, like what would your character do? And they'd be like, oh well, maybe they try to get revenge, or maybe this happened to them in the past that makes them want to do this, or maybe they just have always wanted to open a nice tavern in the countryside somewhere. So that's the sort of thing. Ask them a lot of questions. And then kind of played off of like their character types, history, like for the warlock, his patron a bit, general wishes, and I kind of worked them into side quests where I could. Some of them it was kind of hard. They didn't really have anything specific in mind, and they were just kind of along for the ride. But I kind of thought of some ways to at least give them a little something that's character specific for them, because I want them all to feel like they're involved. So anyhow, that's just, you know, from one fresh DM to another. Hopefully you get some mileage out of this idea or this sort of process. I found it a lot easier to associate my ideas and think of more ideas and flesh them out after I had drawn a map for the setting of like the country that it's taking place in. Now, if you have a more grand venture, like a world map or a continent map, I'm not sure if I can help you there yet, because, you know, I thought this area was big enough to start with. I mean, that's like 600 miles either way. That's a lot of land to cover. And lots of potential adventures. Especially with this whole other a plane, I guess, intersecting with it in places. So, anyhow, thanks for coming along for the ride, I guess.